I have wet floors. The thing that happened recently was the valve next to the fridge went bust, and there's now a bunch of fans trying to dry that up before it gets moldy. If I find out how to tune that out in post-production, this clip is still going to make it into the video because I'm a jerk. If I asked a random stranger what they thought was the dumbest law in Minnesota, I would probably get an oddly specific answer that only one political party will agree is actually the dumbest law in Minnesota. But when it comes to one of the dumbest laws in Minnesota, just about everyone here is on the same page. In this video, I am going to tell you what the dumbest law in Minnesota is. And yeah, it's dumb. Everyone agrees it's one of the dumbest laws in Minnesota. I say it is the dumbest law in Minnesota. I am, of course, referring to the 3.2% law. It goes by a bunch of different names, so I'm gonna pick one. Let me think about that. Low alcohol beer. That's going to be the term I am going to use for the rest of this video. In Minnesota, for some strange reason, you can only buy low alcohol beer at a convenience store, at a grocery store, at a big box store. If you go to a Target or a Walmart, one of two things will happen. You either will get low alcohol beer and beverages on the shelf. That will be your only option, or you will walk into a store that has a completely separate liquor section that is completely walled off. If you are to sell alcohol in a store, you have to pick the walled off option or the low alcohol beer option, and you can't have both at the same time. To Minnesota's credit, the alcohol laws in Minnesota are not anywhere near as restrictive as Pennsylvania and many parts of the South, but they are still restrictive. It used to be the case that you could not buy alcohol on Sunday at all. They changed that in 2017, but they still need to fix one more thing, and that is the low alcohol beer law. They need to get rid of that. When it comes to buying alcohol in Minnesota, there are plenty of options here. Minnesota is not an alcoholic beverage control state like Pennsylvania and a lot of southern states. It never has been, and hopefully it never will be. There are also no dry counties in Minnesota. Local governments can set up some restrictions, but they can't ban the sale of alcohol outright here. When it comes to buying alcohol in Minnesota, you do have some options. You can go to a store with a walled off liquor section and buy it there as long as you have a valid ID. If you buy enough to trigger this, you may have to sign a liquor log that is the store saying that you, under penalty of perjury, will not be reselling the alcohol that you buy. Fair enough. It's a very simple process, signing the liquor log unless you go to a place that does it on paper, then it is a pain. But the digital one, yeah, it's a very simple process. I agree, sign, tap the thing. Cool. But the low alcohol beer law in Minnesota makes it a bit more tedious to get that alcohol. You have to buy your groceries on one side and then buy your alcohol on another side. I guess the only real perk to this is if it is at a warehouse club, you don't need to show your membership to go on the liquor side. If you go to a warehouse club in Missouri, the alcohol in that warehouse club is in the same space as the other items. So you have to have a membership to get to that alcohol there. But there is one part of the low alcohol beer law in Minnesota that I personally find to be a very big pain. While this is not a paid endorsement, I do really like shopping at Aldi. They have low prices, the food there is pretty good, but you can't buy alcohol there. And Aldi has some pretty good alcohol. And, you know, you can buy it for a low price. And you can't do that in Minnesota. There are selections of alcohol I can't get here. I can't go into a store I really like and buy alcohol at that store because of the low alcohol beer law. Aldi operates in a way in which they pretty much just said, no, we're not going to sell alcohol in Minnesota because the laws are too restrictive. Imagine an Aldi with a separate liquor section. Where would that go? Aldi has very low square footage. They can't do that. And, you know, God forbid Aldi hire one more person to man a very small area. In parts of the state, having part of Aldi walled off to only sell alcohol would break a fire code because it's just so gosh darn small. And in general, it would just be easier to get alcohol in one part of the building. Just get my groceries, get my alcohol that I can drink and enjoy, and just do that in one trip. Why is that? Why do we have to put restrictions on that? I honestly prefer to drink caffeine when doing these videos. Let's continue. Getting to Duluth is a long stretch of Interstate 35. And getting alcohol on the way to Duluth, yeah, that's a bit of a hassle. In order to do that, you have to go to a grocery store, which is further off the highway than a convenience store. I would love to be able to buy regular beer or even hard liquor at a convenience store, put that in the trunk, and just continue the rest of the way to Duluth or a family gathering in another part of the state. But I can't do that here. In Kansas City, you most certainly can. So, in Kansas City, they have this place called Quick Trip with a Q, and it is a lot better than convenience stores in Minnesota in general, but they also let you buy a selection of regular beer and other alcohol. Minnesota doesn't let you do that. In Minnesota, if you have a convenience store chain or franchise, you can do one of two things. You can either not sell alcohol there at all or sell low alcohol beer. In Minnesota, there are a lot of independent liquor stores. In some parts of the state, the independent liquor store may be your only option, or the closest option when it comes to buying alcohol. With the elimination of the 3.2% low alcohol beer law, the independent liquor stores will have a lot more competition. They will have to compete with grocery stores and big box stores that choose to sell regular beer and hard liquor in the same space, as well as convenience stores that will also choose to sell regular strength beer and hard liquor. And the liquor stores will also have to compete with Aldi and its liquor selection. This increased competition may be the reason that the Minnesota legislature isn't pressing full steam ahead with repealing the low alcohol beer law. Minnesota will be the only state that has a low alcohol beer law sometime later this year. Utah got rid of its low alcohol beer law, and the rest of the states that had one got rid of theirs in the 2010s. So other than to keep a few liquor stores happy with having less competition, there really is no reason for the low alcohol beer law to exist. Keeping liquor stores happy with less competition is a really stupid reason to uphold the current laws. So where do we go from here? The Minnesota legislature needs to repeal the low alcohol beer law. It may not happen this year. It may be next year's problem due to COVID-19. But once they come out with a vaccine, or when everything calms down a bit, that should be one of their first and foremost priorities. And this is an issue that Republicans and the DFL can pretty much agree on. The problem isn't so much division among political parties as there are competing interests. You have the big box stores, grocery stores, convenience stores, and drug stores that really want this restriction to die. This is a far more powerful lobby than the liquor store lobby, or whoever is cobbling together to try and keep the law in place. The lobby supporting the ban on selling alcohol in stores on Sunday was flimsy at best, and they lost. The lobby supporting low alcohol beer law is also somewhat flimsy, but there is some business. It's not purely religious, but even then, it's not as strong as support for repealing the low alcohol beer law in pure dollar amounts. Which brings us to the thumbnail of this video, where Walmart is trying to get its customers to lobby the legislature for the sale of regular and hard liquor in the same sales space as the rest of its stores. I really would encourage all Minnesotans to press for the low alcohol beer law to be repealed. I would love for it to be done in this legislative session, but that's not likely to happen. This feeds into the broader issue of our legislative sessions being very short. But that's another topic for another video. So hopefully in the next legislative session, they will repeal the low alcohol beer law. When the low alcohol beer law does get repealed, it's going to be a long process. There are some stores that will immediately perform resets and will do whatever they can to reroute their supply chain so that they can sell alcohol, liquor, the good stuff in their stores. And there are some stores that may decide not to. And there are some stores still, like the big warehouse clubs, that may choose to maintain the completely separate space for liquor because that's just the most cost-effective thing for them to do. Stores that have a separate walled-off area will have a specialized associate checking IDs for every sale, and the associates that are outside of that walled-off area will not have to do that as frequently. But there are the stores that will have regular strength beer and hard liquor suddenly in the same space, so the associates at those stores will need to check for IDs more frequently because the sale of alcohol in general in those stores will rise. And while this is purely speculation, it wouldn't surprise me if Minnesota let some types of stores sell hard liquor and full-strength beer earlier than others. Regardless, money will have to be allocated to aid in the transition and to update the system and the way that alcohol licenses are given out. Another possible side effect for letting just about any retailer sell full-strength beer and hard liquor and wine is with the uptick in sales of alcoholic beverages in general. Stores may hesitate to hire minors in their space because the way the current laws work, if you want to buy a restricted item, you have to get a manager to check the ID if the minor is the one ringing you up or assisting you at a self-checkout. Legally speaking, a minor is not even allowed to touch a restricted item that is for sale. They have to immediately call a manager to check the ID and approve that sale and also scan the item. In Missouri, I have noticed that a lot of the people staffing the store are over 18. They just are, because it saves the hassle of having to get the manager over to approve that purchase. There may be some stores that will choose to keep their current setup, especially the ones that have a walled-off liquor section, because in that case, they don't need to call a manager for every liquor sale because the person working on the liquor sales is not a minor, so they can just check the IDs and approve the sale. So yes, it may become more difficult for minors to find jobs. I don't think that's a good enough reason to keep the low alcohol beer law in Minnesota in place. Regardless of where you live in the country, minors can still find work if they try hard enough. Plus, it is not completely essential for minors to be working anyway. If the low alcohol beer law in Minnesota gets repealed, it will be easier for businesses to sell alcohol. They will have more options in doing that, and it will be easier for consumers to purchase it. There's really no point in keeping this anymore. And the Minnesota legislature should definitely repeal this. It may cost the state some money to implement the repeal. Yes, repealing some laws actually costs money, but in the end, you will leave consumers with more choices in where to buy alcohol and businesses with more options with how to sell it. Everyone wins. Now, about those ID cards.